It's everyone's friend, it's Tyler. It's everyone's friend, it's Tyler.
Hey guys, Tyler here. For today's episode, Compared to Mythology, we can compare and contrast the Satyricon to the New Testament. When it comes down to the absolute dating of the Satyricon, we do know it's commonly dated back to roughly around 63 to 65 CE, and that only segments of a much more larger text have survived. The earliest of the Gospels is the book of Mark, and while there's a disagreement about where Mark wrote, there's a consensus about what he wrote. He probably composed his work in or roughly around the year 70 CE. About 15 years later after Mark, and about the year 85 CE, the author known as Matthew composed his work, drawing on a variety of sources including Mark and from a collection of sayings that scholars later called the Q document. The Gospel of Luke was written around 15 years later, between 85 and 95 CE. And the final book, which is the Gospel of John, was written down between 90 and 100 CE. So based upon the dating that we established, it's safe to say that the Satyricon was written down much earlier in comparison to the Gospel writings. And so the question then becomes, what exactly are the similarities between the Satyricon and the Gospels? The first idea that is very similar between the two stories is the idea of the Last Supper, because prior to Jesus being crucified, he had a supper with all 12 disciples. The book of Mark, which is the earliest of the Gospels, says on the first day of the festival, it was customary to sacrifice the Passover lamb. Jesus' disciples asked him, "What do you want us to go and make preparations for you to eat the Passover?" So he sent two of his disciples, telling them, "Go into the city, and a man carrying a jar of water will meet you. Follow him. Say to the owner of the house he enters, 'The teacher asks, where is my guest room? Where may I eat the Passover with my disciples?' He will show you a large room upstairs, furnished and ready. Make preparations for us there." The disciples left, went to the cities, and found things just as Jesus had told them, so they prepared the Passover. Similarly, in chapter 2 of the Satyricon, we have a character that is known as Trimanchio, and Trimanchio has a Last Supper too, but this one is much more light in comparison to the one that Jesus had.
We had now come to the dining room, at the entrance to which sat a factor receiving accounts, and, what gave me cause for astonishment, rods and axes were fixed to the doorposts, superimposed, as it were, upon the bronze beak of a ship, whereon was inscribed, "To Gaius Pompeius Trimalchio, of the Augustan College, from Cinemus his steward." A double lamp, suspended from the ceiling, hung beneath the inscription, and a tablet was fixed to each doorpost. One, if my memory serves me, was inscribed, "On December 30th and 31st, our Gaius dines out." The other bore a painting of the moon in her phases, and the 7 planets, and the days which were lucky, and those which were unlucky. We had had enough of these novelties, and started to enter the dining-room, when on the tray stood a donkey made of Corinthian bronze, bearing panniers containing olives, white in one and black in the other. 2 platters flanked the figure, on the margins of which were engraved Trimalchio's name and the weight of the silver in each. Dormice, sprinkled with poppy seed and honey, were served on little bridges soldered fast to the platter, and hot sausages on a silver gridiron, underneath which were damson plums and pomegranate seeds. We were in the midst of these delicacies, when, to the sound of music, Trimalchio himself was carried in and bolstered up in a nest of small cushions, which forced a snicker from the less wary.
Another commonality between the two stories is the anointment of the feet. When one of the Pharisees invited Jesus to have dinner with him, he went to the Pharisee's house and reclined at the table. A woman in that town who lived in a sinful life learned that Jesus was eating at the Pharisee's house, so she came there with an ambassador of jar of perfume. As she stood behind his feet weeping, she began to wet his feet with her tears. Then she wiped them with her hair, kissed them, and poured perfume on them. With the case of the Satyricon, what we see is that once the guests go inside the house to have dinner, the slaves actually volunteer to wash the guests' feet.
We had had enough of these novelties, and started to enter the dining room, when a slave, detailed to this duty, cried out, "Right foot first!" Naturally, we were afraid that some of us might break some rule of conduct and cross the threshold the wrong way. Nevertheless, we started out, stepping off together with the right foot, when all of a sudden a slave who had been stripped threw himself at our feet and commenced begging us to save him from punishment, as it was no serious offence for which he was in jeopardy. The steward's clothing had been stolen from him in the baths, and the whole value could scarcely amount to 10 sesterces. So we drew back our right feet and intervened with the steward, who was counting gold pieces in the hall, begging him to remit the slave's punishment. Putting a haughty face on the matter, "It's not the loss I mind so much," he said, "as it is the carelessness of this worthless rascal. He lost my dinner clothes, given me on my birthday they were by a certain client, Tyrian purple too, but it had been washed once already. But what does it amount to? I make you a present of the scoundrel." We felt deeply obligated by his great condescension, and the same slave for whom we had interceded rushed up to us as we entered the dining-room, and to our astonishment kissed us thick and fast, voicing his thanks for our kindness. "You'll know in a minute whom you did a favour for," he confided. "The master's wine is the thanks of a grateful butler." At length we reclined, and slave boys from Alexandria poured water cooled with snow upon our hands, while others, following, attended to our feet and removed the hangnails with wonderful dexterity. Nor were they silent, even during this disagreeable operation, but they all kept singing at their work.
Now, the main reason why the anointing of feet is actually quite common in Greek stories is largely because we do know that people in the past used to wear sandals, and so sometimes their feet get worn out by wearing the sandals all the time, or sometimes they had no shoes whatsoever, and so by the time they get home, their shoes or their sandals or their feet get dirty, and so that's why a lot of people back then wanted to volunteer to clean a person's feet as a sign of respect. Another similarity between the two stories is the issue of cannibalism. For example, in Luke chapter 22, verse 19 to 20, and Matthew chapter 26, verse 28 through 26, and Mark chapter 14, verse 22 to 24, we do know that what happened was that Jesus gave the body of his flesh to his 12 disciples, and he also gave them the wine, which also represents his blood. Now, depending on the Christian denomination, there are some Christian denominations that take it literally and some that don't take it literally. Like the Protestant denominations see it as symbolic and not necessarily literal, and they have separate chalices for each person, while the Catholic Church have a single chalice for their masses, and they do think that the flesh and the wine are literal representations of the body and blood of Jesus Christ. The Satyricon says the ship from Africa with your money and slaves that you promised does not arrive. The fortune hunters are tired out, and their generosity is shrinking, so that unless I am mistaken, our unusual luck is on its way back to punish you. All of those who come into money under my will, except my own children, will get what I have left on one condition, that they cut my body in pieces and eat it up in sight of the crowd. We know that in some country a law still is observed that dead people shall be eaten by their relations, and the result is that sick people are often blamed for spoiling their own flesh, so I warn my friends not to disobey my orders, but to eat my body as heartily as they damn my soul. The role of the rooster has a significant part in both of the texts. For example, in Mark chapter 14, verse 30, it says, "Truly I tell you," Jesus answered, "today, yes, tonight, before the rooster crows twice, you yourself will disown me 3 times." Peter, warning himself, she looked at him and said, "You are also with the Nazarene Jesus." But he denied it, saying, "I neither know or understand what you mean." And he went out into the gateway, and the rooster crowed. And the servant girl saw him and began again to say to the bystanders, "This man is one of them." But again he denied it. And after a little while, the bystanders again said to Peter, "Surely you're one of them, for you are a Galatian." But he began to invoke a curse on himself and swear, "I do not know this man of whom you speak." And immediately the rooster crowed a second time, and Peter remembered how Jesus had said to him, "Before the rooster crows twice, you will deny me 3 times," and he broke down and wept. In the Satyricon, there was also a rooster that pretty much crowed whenever something bad's going to happen.
When the fumes of the wine had been dissipated, we were conducted into another dining room where Fortunata had laid out her own treasures. I noticed, for instance, that there were little bronze fishermen upon the lamps. The tables were of solid silver. The cups were porcelain inlaid with gold. Before our eyes, wine was being strained through a straining cloth. "One of my slaves shaves his first beard today," Trimalchio remarked at length. "A promising, honest, thrifty lad. May he have no bad luck. So let's get our skins full and stick around till morning." He had not ceased speaking when a cock crowed. Alarmed at this omen, Trimalchio ordered wine thrown under the table and told them to sprinkle the lamps with it, and he even went so far as to change his ring from his left hand to his right.
The role of the rooster was pretty huge in Hellenistic culture. For example, one of the most famous Greek stories is called the Rooster. Now, this particular story is based upon the Greek god that is known as Electrion, who happens to be the god of the roosters. What happens in the story is that Electrion was actually an ordinary adolescent person before he turned into a rooster. "Detested bird, may Zeus crush your every bone, envious brute, to wake me from delightful dreams of wealth and magic, blessing it with those piercing notes. Am not even asleep to find single refuge in poverty? Poverty is more vile than your foul self. Why, it cannot be midnight yet, it's all hush. Numbness, surely messenger of approaching dawn, has not yet approached his morning office upon my limbs, and his wakeful brute. One would think he's guarding all the golden fence, stirring corn before the night has fully begun. But he shall pay for it. Yes, only wait until daylight comes, and my stick shall avenge me. I am not going to flounder about you in the dark. Why, master, I meant to give you a pleasant surprise. I borrowed what I could from the night, that you might be up early and break the back of your work. Think, if you get a shoe done before sunrise, you are so much nearer to your earning your daybreak. However, if you prefer to sleep I have done, I will be mute as any fish." We see something similar with the death of Socrates. "Go," he said, and in doing as I say, Corito, he heard this, signaled with a nod by a boy servant who was standing nearby, and the servant went in, remaining for some time, and then he came with the man he was going to administer the poison. He was carrying the cup that contained it, ground into the drink. When Socrates saw the man, he said, "You, my good man, since you are experienced in these matters, should you tell me what is needed to be done?" The man answered, "You need to drink it, that's all. Walk around until you find heaviness in your legs, then lie down. This way the poison will do its thing." He was beginning to get cold around the abdomen. Then he uncovered his face, for he covered himself up and said, this is the last thing he uttered, "Crito, I owe the sacrifice of a rooster to Asclepion will pay you that debt and not neglect to do so, and I will make it so." In other words, for the context of Jesus and Socrates and the Satyricon, the rooster is a symbolism to mean that death is approaching his way. One final similarity between the two stories is the idea that somebody was crucified and that somebody was put into an empty tomb. In the book of Matthew, it talks about how there's actually guards at the empty tomb. It's also hidden throughout the Gospels that there are various ideas of great robbers that might steal the body of Jesus Christ. So what exactly does the Satyricon have to say about this particular issue about burial and crucifixion?
But in a little while, Eumolpus, mouthpiece of the distressed and author of the present good understanding, fearing that the general good humour might flag for lack of amusement, began to indulge in sneers at the fickleness of women, how easily they fell in love, how readily they forgot even their own sons. No woman could be so chaste but that she could be roused to madness by a chance passion, nor had he need to quote from old tragedies, or to have recourse to names notorious for centuries. On the contrary, if we care to hear it, he would relate an incident which had occurred within his own memory, whereupon, as we all turned our faces towards him and gave him our attention, he began as follows. There was a certain married lady at Ephesus, once upon a time, so noted for her chastity that she even drew women from the neighbouring states to come to gaze upon her. When she carried out her husband, she was by no means content to comply with the conventional custom and follow the funeral cortege with her hair down, beating her naked breast in sight of the onlookers. She followed the corpse even into the tomb, and, when the body had been placed in the vault, in accordance with the Greek custom, she began to stand vigil over it, weeping day and night. Neither parents nor relations could divert her from punishing herself in this manner and from bringing on death by starvation. The magistrates, the last resort, were rebuffed and went away, and the lady, mourned by all as an unusual example, dragged through the 5th day without nourishment. A most faithful maid was in attendance upon the poor woman. She either wept in company with the afflicted one, or replenished the lamp which was placed in the vault, as the occasion required. Throughout the whole city there was but one opinion. Men of every calling agreed that here shone the one solitary example of chastity and of love. In the meantime, the governor of the province had ordered some robbers crucified near the little vault, in which the lady was bewailing her recent loss. On the following night, a soldier, who was standing guard over the crosses for fear someone might drag down one of the bodies for burial, saw a light shining brightly among the tombs and heard the sobs of someone grieving. A weakness common to mankind made him curious to know who was there and what was going on. So he descended into the tomb, and, catching sight of a most beautiful woman, he stood still, afraid at first that it was some apparition or spirit from the infernal regions. But he finally comprehended the true state of affairs, as his eye took in the corpse lying there, and as he noted the tears on the face lacerated by the fingernails, he understood that the lady was unable to endure the loss of the dear departed. He then brought his own scanty ration into the vault, and exhorted the sobbing mourner not to persevere in useless grief, or rend her bosom with unavailing sobs. The same end awaited us all, the same last resting place, and other platitudes by which anguished minds are recalled to sanity. But, oblivious to sympathy, she beat and lacerated her bosom more vehemently than before, and tearing out her hair, she strewed it upon the breast of the corpse. Notwithstanding this, the soldier would not leave off, but persisted in exhorting the unfortunate lady to eat, until the maid, seduced by the smell of the wine, I suppose, was herself overcome, and stretched out her hand to receive the bounty of their host. Refreshed by food and drink, she then began to attack the obstinacy of her mistress. "What good will it do you to die of hunger?" she asked, "or to bury yourself alive, or to surrender an uncondemned spirit before the fates demand it? Think you the ashes or sepultured dead can feel aught of thy woe? Would you recall the dead from the reluctant fates? Why not shake off this womanish weakness, and enjoy the blessings of light while you can? The very corpse lying there ought to convince you that your duty is to live. When pressed to eat or to live, no one listens unwillingly, and the lady, thirsty after an abstinence of several days, finally permitted her obstinacy to be overcome, nor did she take her fill of nourishment with less avidity than had the maid who had surrendered first. But to make a long story short, you know the temptations that beset a full stomach. The soldier laid siege to her virtue with the selfsame blandishments by which he had persuaded her that she ought to live. Nor, to her modest eye, did the young man seem uncouth or wanting in address. The maid pled in his behalf, and kept repeating, "Why will you fight with a passion that to you is pleasure, remembering not in whose lands you are taking your leisure? But why should I keep you longer in suspense?" The lady observed the same abstinence when it came to this part of her body, and the victorious soldier won both of his objectives. So they lay together, not only that night, in which they pledged their vows, but also the next, and even the third, shutting the doors of the vault, of course, so that anyone, acquaintance or stranger, coming to the tomb, would be convinced that this most virtuous of wives had expired upon the body of her husband. As for the soldier, so delighted was he with the beauty of his mistress and the secrecy of the intrigue, that he purchased all the delicacies his pay permitted, and smuggled them into the vault as soon as darkness fell. Meanwhile, the parents of one of the crucified criminals, observing the laxness of the watch, dragged the hanging corpse down at night and performed the last rite. The soldier was hoodwinked while absent from his post of duty, and when on the following day he caught sight of one of the crosses without its corpse, he was in terror of punishment, and explained to the lady what had taken place. He would await no sentence of court-martial, but would punish his neglect of duty with his own sword. Let her prepare a place for one about to die. Let that fatal vault serve both the lover and the husband. "Not that!" cried out the lady, no less merciful than chaste. "The gods forbid that I should look at the same time upon the corpses of the two men dearest to me. I would rather hang the dead than slay the living." So saying, she gave orders for the body of her husband to be lifted out of the coffin and fastened upon the vacant cross. The soldier availed himself of the expedient suggested by this very ingenious lady, and next day everyone wondered how a dead man had found his way to the cross. The sailors received this tale with roars of laughter, and Tryphena blushed not a little, and laid her face amorously upon Guyton's neck. But Lycas did not laugh.
So what do you guys think about the comparisons between the Gospels and the Satyricon? Tell me in the comment section down below, and as always, I'll see you guys in the next video.
It's everyone's friend, it's Tyler. He's your only black friend, so he's your best black friend. I wouldn't trade him for another black friend, because black friends are rare, as you should be aware. He smiles like Richard Pryor, so just sit and stare. It's everyone's friend, it's Tyler. It's everyone's friend, it's Tyler. It's everyone's friend, it's Tyler.